and her topic is using Al-Anon to boost myself over life's hurdles. And we have had that.
Hi, I'm Margaret, and I've been in Al-Anon for 10 years in Menlo Park and for 28 years over the whole thing. And I asked them to turn out those lights so that I could see you, because otherwise you were a blur because of the brightness in my face. I've heard almost my whole speech in just the introduction, but of course you know that what I say is confidential, and more importantly, I want you to know that nothing I say should be construed as advice. I feel very strongly that advice is what you tell yourself after you've gathered the facts that apply to your situation. Everybody has a unique situation, and you should not consider that what I tell you that I did is advice that that's what you should do, or when you should do it, for all of that. It's been my experience that most people that I have spoken to in groups hear what's at the beginning of the talk and what's at the end of the talk. So I'm going to use two good things, one at the beginning and one at the end. In the middle will be all the rubbish that I add to the picture. I'd like to begin by telling you that I've discovered in thinking about it that I probably always knew about a higher power, because in 1966, most of you weren't alive then, don't worry. In 1966, I had a very extensive cancer surgery. You see, I'm still here, so don't worry about that either. But I did get in touch with my mother. I was newly married, and I got in touch with my mother to come and help. And I asked her if she would bring with her the little card she had in the corner of her mirror. And she did, and the card said, I said to the man who stood at the gate of the year, "Give me a light. I must go out into the unknown." And he said to me, "Go out into the unknown. Put your hand into the hand of God. It will be for you better than a light, and it is safer than a known way." I have recited that for so long, and it is such a support to me to know that there is something that is better than a light I can create and safer than a known way, and it is reaching out to the hand of a higher power. So let me begin by giving you a sort of a nitty-gritty overview of my situation, why I'm in Al-Anon, so that you have a template on which I hang the remainder of my remarks. I adopted two sons. The older one is lovely, simple, and attractive. The younger one is lovely, brilliant, and not simple. He was a failing newborn, and my husband is a pediatrician. The agency knew we were willing to adopt a child, and so they were comforted by the fact that they could deliver this child, whose health was very poor, into our hands, and we would do the best we could to raise him. What a treat it has been to be his parents. What a gift that I could reach out to his birth parents and let them know what this did for my life. So he did brilliantly until 6th grade, until it was a very hot day, like today, and he asked if he could go after school to a friend's house where they had a swimming pool. We weren't like that. And of course I said yes, not knowing that there was an open liquor cabinet and that there would be liquor poured into soft drinks while they flopped around in the swimming pool. It caught him. It absolutely caught him. He was semi-comatose when the other frightened children got in touch with us, and from then on it went downhill. His grades failed. He was in a prestigious private school locally. His friends became rather peculiar and atypical. He isolated himself up in his bedroom, and things went from bad to worse. We did all the wrong things. The courts got involved in this whole thing, but they put him on probation, nice, young, brilliant young man, and of course he didn't do what they directed him to do. As things spiraled out of control, I was told about Al-Anon, and I began, probably when he was about 13, I began attending Al-Anon. And things went from bad to worse, and finally he was in such bad odor that the court suggested, in fact directed, that he enter a treatment program. This is probably 2.5 or 3 years after we were aware of his nonsense, which began in the 6th grade. So I then came, and what I call my annus horribilis, because that's the term that the Queen made popular when her life went to bits in Britain, maybe you remember that, because as he disappeared into a treatment program, my father, who was 87 and living in Berkeley, had a fall, hit his head, and died. So there was my widowed dependent mother. He died on their 62nd wedding anniversary. She didn't get much free time, poor lady. He was also brilliant and difficult. But anyway, he died. So I continued on with a responsible job in the healthcare field, but at the end of each day, I would contact my only sibling, a sister who lived up in the Napa Valley, and we would have one of those quick, intimate conversations that you can have. Hi, how are you? Okay, have you called Mother? No, I haven't. All right, I'll call her now. You call her at bedtime. Fine. And we had that conversation, and I locked my office door, got in my car, and drove home. The phone was ringing. I ran in to answer the phone, and my sister was deceased. She had stood up and died. She was 60. So now I was thrown back into the grief that I began to know with my father's death, but it was only a few months later when this happened, and my son was in treatment, court-ordered treatment. When we got my sister buried, she had a son and a husband. When all that was dealt with, my husband and I took a holiday to Kauai and made the mistake of... we went to Kauai, but we made the mistake of letting our son in treatment know that. So I don't think we were in the sky before he had absconded from treatment. And he went to our home, and he hid there. And of course, the police were alerted, and he was smart enough to not turn on any lights or anything like that. So that when we came home from our holiday, sure enough, we lit up the house, and within minutes almost came the black and white car and took our son away in handcuffs. I'll never forget it. It was ghastly. They read him his rights in my front hall. What a heartbreak. It's a story with a good ending. Don't get unhappy yet. But Christmas came and went. We went to away for Christmas, I think, that year. Anyway, Christmas came and went, and in February of that year, my brother-in-law died. So now there was a third person. He was an attorney, and he was managing the estate closures. So there was a third person in the family that was deceased. We were a very close family. And all of a sudden, here this had happened. And so it fell to me to begin to do more about my sister's family because the mother and father were gone. It was only about 4 months later that an automobile accident took away their son. So by this time, I was like the shmoo that got knocked down and bounced back up. But one of the burdens of the whole thing was that everybody's estate had as its trustees and as its people who would inherit, people that were already dead. So we had this tumbling phenomenon with multiple lawyers and CPAs and all that other rubbish. And I was in Al-Anon. Thank you. Something had led me, knew this was going to happen. Now, by this time, we had made all the wrong decisions with our son. We had had lawyers involved, psychiatrists involved. We had provided him with a car. We had changed his school twice. And we had provided allowances, and we had paid for hospital bills when he was carried in various states of disarray. So Al-Anon began to get to me during this time. Now, there has to be a light touch in every awful thing, and I've told you that all these people are dead and I'm a mess, and I have all this rubbish to deal with while maintaining a responsible position in my work. But the phone rang one Saturday morning at my house, And it was one of those fraud calls from your credit card company. We're just calling to find out if you had. Well, my husband answered it, and I would like to have been the lady who was making the call. I would like to have seen her face, because I heard him say, "Just a minute, I'll ask my wife." And he turned to me and he said, "Dear, did we have a funeral in Los Angeles?" Our card had gotten into the funeral industry. Oh my goodness, no, we didn't have one there. We had them a lot of other places, four other places, but one of them wasn't Los Angeles. This was followed with him going to New Mexico to an atypical school there. I'm not going to take your time to tell you how that happened, but that was followed with him deciding that he would go to Hawaii and he would start at University of the Pacific and get a degree. So he was in Hawaii when he telephoned me, and I was well into Al-Anon, and said that he had been tossed out of some sort of a program or his housing. I can't even remember what it was, it's so long ago. And he had no place to sleep and no money, and, he couldn't have played his violin better. And I heard myself say, "Oh, I'm so glad you're in a warm climate." So you see, Al-Anon was getting to me by that point. From there, he vanished. It turns out, in retrospect, that he got as far as Southeast Asia somewhere. But we had no connection with this young man, and eventually, in fear and knowing nothing except that he was drinking his brains out and doing goodness knows what else, we reported him as a missing person, because it was disturbing us that he might be deceased or that we might not be able to be in contact with him again. He had been privileged to the point of having a passport. We had taken him out of the country on a holiday. We had a passport number to give him. And the truth about that is there is an Interpol. When we reported him a missing person, they reported him to Interpol, and Interpol spotted him coming into Cambodia from Laos, I believe. So we found him. So now I'm going to tell you, that's where I started. I started with all these estates to close, a magnificent child that was going down the tubes. The older son was safely at University of Arizona, not creating a problem. I had a dear, wonderful pediatrician husband, Mr. Nice, whose only motto was, "I don't think it's bad to be nice," which wasn't very helpful initially. But it's lovely now, except that now he's in poor health and I have to do most of the nice stuff. But anyway, so now I'd like to tell you how Al-Anon stepped into my life and the ways I've used it to turn so many times during the day or the night and say, "Margaret, what would Al-Anon tell you to do now?" For a moment, I want to begin at the steps. Step one told me something I already knew. My life was unmanageable. But it also told me that I was powerless. And I was at the peak of my power, damn it. I was managing all these funerals and families and my lost son, and Mr. Nice was smiling the whole time, and I kept the house going and the office going and all the rest of it. I was powerful and I was offended. And I told them in my meeting, there was a parent meeting that took place in Burlingame, below those many years ago. Doesn't anymore, as far as I know. Anyway, I told them, this powerlessness, you don't understand what I'm doing. You don't understand what I've done for this young man who is purposely behaving badly. He's behaving badly to get attention from me because I have so many other things to put my attention on. I didn't understand the disease concept. I thought he was badly behaved. It never occurred to me that he was sick, that he had an illness. He was not badly behaved. He couldn't behave any other way, any more than if he had leukemia, he could shout at his arm, "Don't make any more of those white cells." He was sick. And I was offended that anybody would tell me I was powerless. Within 4 weeks, not only did they tell me I was powerless, But they told me that if I would just accept being powerless, there might be some help. Well, I'd heard about that help, as I told you at the beginning. But it was hard to think that I would give up my power. I might share it. Help me, God, while I deal with this. Bolster my power when I'm tired. But the idea of just stepping away was not within my DNA at that point. A month after that, of course, they told me that I was to quit. Just get out of the picture, for goodness sake. Not halfway. Sort of like some of those of you who've been involved in Christian worship know about Lent, how you're supposed to give up something for Lent. You're supposed to stop drinking or stop biting your nails or any of the other crazy habits that you have. And I was very deeply dipped in the Episcopal, the Anglican Church, and so I always did that until I finally got to the point where I realized that that was really going halfway. Why would I go halfway with God at Lent? I might as well just give up altogether. And here comes step 3, and it says give up. For goodness sake, get out of the way. Give up on all this nonsense that you're doing, all this powerfulness that you're throwing all over there. If you'll get out of the way, there's somebody who will help, or something that will help, or a way that will help. I don't know what it is. To this day, I don't know what it is. Can I say that in a church? There are moments when I know, and there are moments when I wonder, and there are moments when I don't know. But here comes the 3rd step, and it says, get out of the way, lady. Stop this powerful will that you have. Boy, do I have will. I had enough will to get myself through graduate school, to grow up with an awful father. I had enough will to do a whole lot of stuff. And I was supposed to just put that all down, walk away. But I learned that if I did a bit of that, I could always look over my shoulder and see if, in fact, there was some help appearing. And the weird thing was, there was. It wasn't always what I expected, but weird things would happen that made it a little bit better. And I began to think that there was something going on that I wasn't directing. I'd always believed there had to be a God, because if there wasn't, we're in a mess. There has to be. If there isn't a God, there should be. It's sort of the sentence you want to think about. If you're in a foxhole and they're firing over your head, you're going to go, God, come on, God, keep me alive. Everybody does when the chips are down. So I had to work with that idea. So there I was, with the core principles. And if I'd walked away from Al-Anon then, I had all the information I needed to pull myself together, get out of the way of my higher power, and wait and watch and see what happened. But along came the 4th step. Ooh, I forgot to push my timer down. You see, they're recording this, so they hear rubbish like that on their record. It's dreadful. It's just dreadful. But the next thing comes the dreaded 4th step. Well, I resisted it for, I think several years. But, of course, there's that nice, nifty blue book. And one thing I discovered was that I could go to the place in the blue book where I listed the good things about me. And I could actually find a few things, sort of steadfast and trying hard and faithful and no adultery and a few other winners I could list that made me look, when I read them back, I said, well, you might be okay. So it might not be so scary to write down all the terrible things, which are so easy for me to find. Particularly raised as I was in the Episcopal Church, where each day I was told to recognize that I have done the things I ought not to have done. And you see, somebody's going, somebody remembers the general confession. Yes. Left undone those things I ought to have done, and done those things I ought not to have done. That was recited every day from 1st grade on. That made a big impression on me. Still does. So here came the dreadful list, and I was able to make a dreadful list, beginning with what I'd left undone, and then going on to the things that I had done that I should not have done. And I mentioned on the list about my dreadful temper, how I could just suddenly fly off the handle. That's genetic. My father could do a lot of that, and he did a lot of that. And he lived at a place called, he lived at an address on 5th Street in a little town called Hinsdale, Illinois. And when I would fly off the handle after I was married, my husband would come up to me, lean into my ear and say, "Panic on 5th Street, panic on 5th Street." And this quickly pointed out to me that I had this meltdown ability, which I still have. But the nice thing about making the list of all the things that are dreadful and then going on to the next step and listing them all to somebody you know, the nice thing about that was that when you did it again, you noticed it. You noticed, oh yeah, that's the thing I wrote down. Because pretty soon I was going to come to a step where I could get rid of all of those. I could ask, I could tell somebody about them. Then I could think about whether they were doing me any good. That's the next step. Was I ready? Was I willing to give up all those defects of character? That spoke to me, defects of character. Got a bunch of those. And pretty soon I realized that some of them were very effective. Some of my defects were really pushing me down the line. They were giving me a push to do this and that and something else that was making a very constructive life indeed. Earning a reasonable salary, keeping all the balls in the air and all the rest of it. Was I really ready to get rid of all of that, the way I had been, to be a different way? Could I be a different me and still do all that stuff? The other problem with that is that I was having asked God to take them away. And I've already told you, some days I'm wondering, God's going to take them away? Come on. You know, so that was difficult for me. But I persisted, I persevered on all of that. I tried to be patient. And a few other dreadful things happened in my life. I visited my son in juvenile hall on one occasion, a very bitter experience. And I sat down across from him and talked to him about our situation, his and mine. And I sat talking to him in the way that a nun sits, because I had a long period of life in a convent. Yes, there are Episcopal Anglican convents. And the nun sits like this or like this. And so I was sitting there saying, now you see, there's this problem. You have this and this and this and this, and I have this and this and this and this. And I said, as far as you're concerned with your illness of addiction and the results of your behaviors, and they are as follows, and you know, and that's why we're here, I have to tell you, here they are. They're all yours. I give them to you. I remember doing that so clearly. I simply handed him, tossed him. If I'd had Jell-O in my hand, he would have had splat on his face. I handed him his problems. I remember it so clearly. I must have learned a little bit of that in Al-Anon. Shortly after that, I had an episode while my husband was in hospital, and I was, of course, awake through the night because he wasn't there with me. And I got fairly frantic, and I went out into my backyard, small backyard, where I have the privilege of a hot tub. And I sat in my hot tub for a bit, crying and carrying on and feeling sorry for myself. And I got the idea that I had heard about, that maybe I could send all the burdens up to God, or up to. I could send away the burdens. It's awfully good that we didn't have any motion sensor lights and that really nobody was looking into my backyard that night, because of course I'd stepped out of the hot tub, that is to say, as God had made me, and that's pretty ugly. And I went, and I can see myself yet standing nude in the middle of a small patch of grass with all the problems contained in a helium balloon, standing there thinking, come on, God, if there is a higher power, I've got to send all this away. Am I ready to do that? And I let go. And I pictured all those problems going away. That's not the only time I've done that. But it was a way to use the fifth, sixth bit of the seventh step to lighten my load. So I'd ask the higher power to get rid of all my nonsense and the ugly ways that I behaved in the face of my problems. Unsatisfactory behaviors. Unpleasantness on the telephone to the lawyer for my sister's estate. Problems with the minister for the burial of my nephew. Annoyance at my father for the way he had left things. Concern for my mother. Oh God, it went on and on. I don't know. I stand here and I don't even know the person that got through all of that. But by doing that, I would put down a load. But the shocking thing was that somehow the load got back. And I would find myself carrying the same rubbish, worrying about the same things, being unpleasant about the same things. I could see my defects of character and what they were doing to me. And I would go through it over and over and over. And to this day, I can spot episodes and have to go back and say, let it go, let it be, get out of the way. There will be a solution to this. If you'll just shut up and listen, don't just do something, sit there and listen to what's happening, see what's happening, pay attention to that's not mine. Everybody uses the same ring. I've got to change mine. Okay. Put that on your recording. Figure it out. Okay, so step 8 says you have to be willing. Things had gotten so bad, I was willing to almost anything at that point. So then it says you got to do it. You got to go to all those people that you've harmed and say, when I did such and such, I'm still remembering about that, and it's really bothering me. And it suggests in the literature that you go do the simple ones first. The first thing you discover when you do that is most of them have forgotten. I don't remember that you came to my birthday party and you didn't stay and we had that argument. I don't remember that, Margaret. It was amazing. I was dragging more luggage around on a roller than you can imagine. I was wearing it. I was dragging it. I was seeing it on my walls in paintings. It was crazy. And you just progress like that unless you come across one that you think, if you bring that up, the whole thing's going to fall apart. And then you leave that one to God. So that's the next project, except for my favorite step. Now you're coming to step 9, which says, when we were wrong, we promptly admitted it. I love it. Every time I goof up, I simply get back to the person I goofed up with and said, you know what? I was wrong. It feels so good. When I'm in a family situation, all 4 together, and I say the wrong thing, set up something wrong, conduct myself unsatisfactorily for the family, I love being able to say, you know what? I've thought about that. I was wrong. I'm really sorry. This is my favorite step because it relieves me. I carry enough around without new nitty-gritty to deal with. And almost always when I'm wrong, it's something that appeared over in that 4th step rubbish list, the bad stuff. So now we've made our way through. I'm going fast enough, I think. We've made our way through, promptly admitted it, and now we've got to step 11. Now, step 11 says that we've got to keep our conscious contact with God. Keep in touch is really what it says, Now keep in touch, dear. How do you keep in touch with your higher power? Well, I guess you think about it. Some people pray, some people sing, some people read, some people meditate, some people go for long walks. I've tried them all. Some of them work for me and some of them don't. But what they do is remind me that there is this juxtaposition of me putting my will in the system and a higher power that is trying to keep my will in check while the higher power deals with my son. And not have me mess up his association, her association, its association, what do you say about a higher power, with the addict. Don't get in the way, is what it's saying. Keep in touch, but don't get in my way. So, how has it turned out? Well, it's been very interesting how it's turned out. I've gotten smarter and smarter and smarter about staying out of the way. I'm not perfect. Remember back up there where we were going to put all things, let God take everything away, and then you discovered it was back? Sure, that's happening with me, and I'm at it for 28 years. But what's happening is that eventually I'm giving our situation with our son. I'm going to a counselor, went to an addiction counselor. Here's a piece of news. Don't count on a regular psychiatrist or a regular psychologist. They don't know zippity-doo-dah about addiction illness. Nothing. Be sure you ask for an addiction counselor, or you're wasting your time and your money. I know that from both sides of my desk, let me tell you. Okay, so I was going to a counselor, there is no doubt about that, and I was going to Al-Anon, and I was doing my reading and all that stuff. What was happening with John, the addict? Well, what was happening with John was that he was living in Thailand, and we were sending him money. Dollar transfers through Wells Fargo to BAT, B-H-T, that's their currency. Millions of BAT per dollar. Most ridiculous. Never could figure out how much money he really got, but I have a nice banker who would do these direct transfers to his bank account. Very able young man, had a bank account. And he would get these, long numbers of BAT from me. But he was going from bad to worse. He was still drinking. He was still telling us that he was going to school. We provided a computer. I can't begin to tell you. There were, I need books. I don't have the right clothes. What can I tell you? We were dumb. But I had this counselor, and I had Mr. Nice, my lovely husband, who said, well, I don't think it's wrong to be nice. Well, I finally got him in her presence. And the one thing we figured out, we came down, all of us on the same side. No discussion, no argument. We all agreed. The one thing that didn't work was spending money on John. We had spent money on lawyers, cars, schools, treatment program, whatever, a computer. It didn't work. Wherever we put our money worked out to be a waste. And so over a period of several weeks, we were able to agree to craft a letter that said, it's over. And, we adore this young man. He's a beautiful young man. Wait till you hear. But anyway, we sent the It's Over letter by FedEx to rural Thailand. God knows where he received it. I don't. God probably does know where he received it, come to think of it. Anyway, he received it. He got the message. And the amazing thing is that he stopped digging the hole he was standing in. Before long, I think he threw a ladder up. And before long, he started up the ladder until he was out in the light and he was sober. He took several shots at being sober. He'd make it to 10 months. He'd make it to a year and a half. Couldn't get to 2 years. But eventually, he was getting no money from us, nothing. We were keeping in touch in a haphazard way. And he moved from Chiang Mai to Bangkok, and he got himself a job teaching English to the children of the Thai government. The Thais prefer that their children learn English from a native English speaker. So he was the suitable one for that. That would have been fine, except that one morning his phone rang and a lady's voice said, Mr. John, don't go to the school today. There's going to be a coup. And he looked out his window, and there was a tank in the street, and there was a man at the foot of the stairs in his apartment building with a Kalashnikov and a uniform. So his life got into quite a tangle while he found another way to support himself and remain sober and live in Bangkok. About 6 years ago, we're talking 28 years that I'm talking about here. About 6 years ago, he got in touch with us and said, I have found an American university that has a campus over here, and I would like to go to undergraduate school. By this time, he was 30 plus. More dollars. We said, okay, we knew he was clever. We said, okay, you can go until you mess up, and then it's over. We went to his graduation from that university. It's an American university with a campus in Thailand and one in Geneva, Switzerland, as well as its main campus here in the States. It was teaching politics and economics of the Pacific Rim in the West and politics and economics of the EU in Geneva. We went to his graduation, and he was lauded to a nauseating point. He was the faculty's choice of student. He was the honor student of his group. He was this and he was that. He walked across that stage and I kept taking pictures of him while he was handed one more book or document. Everybody thought he was the bee's knees. And you know what he was? So there he was. He finally had a GED and a college degree and sobriety. And he went back to work. By this time, he was teaching in a university in Bangkok, Siam University. He was teaching graduate students in physics, English, because they needed English to get to write for grants and get to the U.S. to do projects and that sort of thing. So he had a wonderfully intellectual group of students who really wanted his help. Well, I guess graduate school looked good to him because, lo and behold, he approached us again. Could he go to graduate school, please? Well, if you look carefully, you don't even have to look carefully, you can see that I'm an octogenarian, and so is my husband. And when somebody asks you to put them through graduate school, the first thing you think of is, how much money is there? Can we do this? This is a big project when we're senescent and looking at keeping ourselves going. And as I've said to you, my husband is in poor health, so we throw that into the mix. I'm no winner myself, but I'm fine. It's just that I keep getting these recurrent cancers and they cure them, and then I go on for the next one. So, and I really am just fine. It's just that I know how to diagnose cancers early, and so the three that I've had have all turned out to be nothing yet. But still, you do think twice. And he wanted to go to graduate school, for God's sakes. So here's what we did. We said to him, look, John, we're not going to put our hard-earned remaining IRA funds into any old dumb school. You can apply to the 5 top schools in the nation, and if you get into any of them, we'll consider it. You can go looking for financial aid, you can set up a borrowing system with us, but it's got to be good or it's not worth doing at this point for any of us. So he applied to the 5 top schools in the nation. His field is politics and economics of the Pacific Rim. And I said to him, what are you going to do about the 10 years, John, that you can't really account for? At least 10. Oh, he said, Mom, I put them on my CV. I just put the years there, and I wrote, my weaknesses became my strengths. This is a brilliant, interesting young man. Fascinating. I can say that. I got him at the Safeway. I have nothing to do with his genetics. He's just a brilliant young man. So what happens? He got into all 5 schools. I think, Mr. Snowden has made us aware that in Washington they can push a button on a database and find everything out about anybody. So I knew by the time he got into those schools, they knew just what a creature he'd been. I mean, he's got an Interpol number. They had to know something. But anyway, 2 weeks ago, I went to Washington, D.C. with my husband and John's brother, and I sat and watched him receive a master's degree from Johns Hopkins University. It was thrilling for all of us, very fascinating, but he was very busy because he already had a position in a think tank. So here we are. The phoenix has risen from considerable ashes. His illness has corrected itself to the point where he is maintaining a balance. He hasn't relapsed for 10 years. I would like to say that I haven't relapsed for 10 years because I have the other side of the coin. I have an illness that follows his illness quite clearly. And I collapse on the subject periodically. But I go back to the top of the page and promise myself that I am powerless, that if there isn't a God, there should be one. If there is one, I better get in touch. I better stay in touch. I better recognize my weaknesses. I better clean up my act when I mess up. And then came step 12 that said, if this is helping you, if you think this is a good program, best you practice it in all your affairs and take it to others. And that's how I come to be standing here. So I promised you that I would close this out with another good piece of material. I've told you already that to go out into the unknown, it will be better than a light and safer than a known way, as long as your hand is in the hand of God. So I'd like to read to you or recite to you a way of living that I think describes the personality that we should strive to have ourselves. It's a quote from a very long poem by William Cullen Bryant called Thanatopsis, where he closes it out by saying, "So live that when thy summons comes to join the innumerable caravan that moves to that mysterious realm where each shall take his chamber in the silent halls of death, go not as a quarry slave at night scourged to his dungeon, but sustained and soothed by an unfaltering trust, approach thy grave as one who wraps the drapery of his couch about him and lies down to pleasant dreams." It's been a privilege to address you. Thank you.